Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be doing a drawing that is on a Zentangle tile, or an artist tile if you prefer a more general term, but it's not technically a Zentangle drawing. Zentangle by definition is a very specific method of drawing and using repetitive patterns and so on, and of course, as I often say, it is non-representational. That means it's a drawing that's not necessarily meant to look like something in particular. There may be similarities, of course, to objects in the world, but generally it doesn't look like something. It's just an appealing design created through the use of patterns. But since the floral and botanical designs are so popular, even here on this channel, but in general, I decided to do a simplified rendering of a floral arrangement that I hope you will find fun, easy, and enjoyable to do. So let's jump right in. We're going to start toward the bottom of the tile, and we're going to just create some floral or flower patterns. And to my knowledge, these are not particularly named patterns, but if you happen to know the name of these, if there is one, by all means, let me know, and I will update the video description box to include information on who created the step out. But I believe what I'm doing here is just drawing simplified flower designs, and I'm starting in the center dot there, just drawing purposely imperfect little petal designs, but they generally have those three little bumps on them, 3 or 4 little bumps, and that way it just has a more natural appeal to it. And even if the lines are broken a little bit, that's fine, because it creates a more convincing and realistic looking flower. How many flowers do we see in real life that have perfectly symmetrical petals? That doesn't usually happen, at least in my experience. I love looking at flowers out in the world, and they're not always perfectly symmetrical and completely the same from one another. So we just want to create kind of a natural looking pattern here that will become part of our overall drawing. Now I want to mix in this little bouquet, I want to mix different flower types, so I'm going to use a little bit different. Now this one I believe is a tangle, but I could not for the life of me find the step out or who drew it. So again, if you know, let me know and I will give the appropriate credits if that's the case that we need to do. I don't ever want to seem as though I'm bypassing someone if they created an original step out or original way to draw this. Then I want to give them a shout out in that regard. Basically, this one has 3 petals, and then in the space created by those 3 petals, we put some other petals, and then in the space between those, we put some petals. And then what I'm doing is creating a little aura line, if you want to use some Zentangle terminology, that gives the impression of a fold or an additional component to those petals, and just pops it right in there. You can see again I'm purposely drawing these with what I sometimes call a shaky hand drawing. It's got an intentional, I don't want to call it sloppiness because it's by design, but it's got an intentional variation to it that just allows it to look a little more natural, in my opinion. Just trying to give a little variety to the pattern here. As you can see, the process, very much like Zentangle, is quite repetitive, and we're just reusing these shapes so that we can make a pleasing composition, or what we hope is a pleasing composition. Let's see here, what else do we want to put in there? Maybe we'll have one more of these rose looking ones tucked in up here. Now we need to draw some other components like stems and leaves, and these are going to be in the background, so to speak. So we don't want to draw harsh, complete lines. If you're familiar with art in some of its basic mechanisms, you know that sometimes drawing the impression of detail is better than drawing actual detail. So we just want to draw some of that, and I'm going to draw some leaves here that are sticking out and around inside of our little flower arrangement. And now up in here too, where I want in between the flowers, where there are gaps, we can't really see in there because they're all clustered together and the light's not penetrating in there. So I want to draw a little bit of darkness in there, but not out here because the light could get into there. But up in these areas, maybe the light's not so easily penetrating into those areas, and so we get a little bits of darkness here and there that just kind of help with a little bit of contrast in our drawing. Okay. I'm making very light pencil flicks here, just where some of that shadow would be. Yes, there are individual stems back in there, but it's difficult for the eye to just pick that up looking over at that drawing. And now for some tiny bit of additional detail, let's bring couple little stems out, and these are very dainty little stems, and then we're just going to make some dots. Zoom in for you. Just make some dots that are going to give the impression of a fuzzy little component that we've got in our flower mix here. We'll put a few of those in just to help our arrangement look a little more complete. There we go. That looks pretty good. Let's take a little zoomed out view here and see what we've got. I think overall that looks pretty good. So let's down here now at the bottom, let's add just a little bit of a vase idea here. We'll ink in this bottom here. We can't really see down into that vase very well. Let's move on to some shading here. So I'm going to grab my graphite pencil and I'm going to add a little bit of graphite to the center of these flowers, just so I can give some difference of tone, maybe a little bit of these overlapping shadows. We don't want to create huge drop shadows with flowers because they don't really seem to do that when they're in a bundle like this. But some kind of difference there would be fine. So, and on these, I think what I'll do is maybe down in these little areas there's going to be a tiny bit of shadow because that's getting more into the center of that flower, so maybe light's not getting down in there quite as easily. So I just want to add a little bit of little sense of shadow and light and value difference down in there. Doesn't have to be dramatic. You don't want to make it really dark or anything. And we'll blend it a little bit with our paper stump just to move that around. But we don't want to suddenly make it a really dark area. We're not imagining that. We're imagining that we're displaying these flowers out in the light so they can be seen more easily. We're not hiding them in a dark room somewhere, so hopefully there's not tremendous darkness about. Maybe just a little bit of graphite down into the background areas here. And just a touch along the bottom edge, or the edge that maybe isn't directly in that sunlight, just to give some value differences again. And now let's try to blend some of this a little bit. Just by creating a little difference in value, we create the sense of shape. And of course, light and dark and so on, but it helps convey the idea of volume and shape, and not just a flat piece. And maybe there'll be little shadows where they do overlap. Like I said, you can use your blending stump. Once it has a little graphite on it already, you can just use that to add. We don't have to actually add new graphite to the drawing. This will create a little bit of shading in those areas. And we can also add a little bit of value difference on our vase there. All right, now to make this hopefully a tiny bit more interesting from an artistic standpoint, let's add a darkness around the image, not necessarily meant to be a shadow. This is more of an artistic idea here. We'll blend it outward. So I'm just laying in a little graphite around these outer edges of the entire bouquet, the entire flower arrangement. Just kind of making a scribbly mark here so that when I blend it, I can determine how far out and away from the bouquet that will go. This is more of the interpretive process of art here, where we're not mimicking anything again, but we just want to make it a little bit more visually interesting. So now I'm going to just gently coax that graphite outward. So it'll get lighter and lighter as it goes out, and I'm not going to worry about an even, perfectly even display of it here. I want it to almost like light beams or something are emanating out from it. But of course we know it's not light in that sense because we're creating a darker value, but it gives this more of a feeling of a paintedness or an illustrated look rather than some kind of an ultra realism thing. Not that it was ultra realistic to begin with, right? This was a fast, easy step-by-step drawing. Hopefully you were able to follow along and make sense of it. Sometimes it's just fun to create something. You could also, if you wanted, you could take colored pencils and draw or use that to, or markers or whatever you have, and create some actual color in this bouquet. That might be a fun thing to try. And just go around this until you're satisfied with how that looks. Some basic contrast. Value differences are really nice in art like this. It just helps draw the eye to the central piece, and it also helps it not to have too much white space. White space is good. There's nothing wrong with that. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn my light off, one of my lights, so that you can see the graphite a little more easily. It's very difficult on these cameras to see what's happening. Hopefully you can see what we've done there. Now I'm also going to try something here just to add a little bit of additional contrast. I'm going to darken some of these folds in these little petals here, just to see if we can get a little more variety in the drawing. A little more difference between the two flowers, because there's lots of lines going on here. Yeah, I think that helps a little bit here. Just the tiniest hint of black along in there can help make those stand out a little bit. Again, it's about value. Value is perhaps the most important aspect of any kind of drawing because it's what shows detail. A lot of folks think that detail is just that. It's detail. I have to draw 60 million lines and spend 500 hours trying to get every little speck. That's actually not the case. Drawings look better when there's differences in value. Those lights and darks and things like that. And then detail kind of takes care of itself. So there we go. I think that works pretty well. So we'll go ahead and I'll sign that. And so there we have our finished tile for today. So I thank you so very much for joining with me, and I look forward to seeing everyone real soon back here in the Tangles and Tunes channel. Until then, take care and have a great day. Bye-bye now.